7. Thunder Bay's famous shipwrecks. Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary, located in Lake Huron, Michigan, protects over 200 vessels that span 200 years of Great Lakes maritime history. Among them are some of the most famous and fascinating shipwrecks in the United States. Here are 5 of them. Puebig. This steamer was headed for Cleveland with a load of passengers, copper, and miscellaneous cargo when it collided with its sister ship, the Meteor, on August 9, 1865. The Puebig sank within minutes, taking with it more than 100 lives and a fortune in cargo. It's listed in the National Register of Historic Places and is considered Thunder Bay's worst tragedy. Defiance and John J. Audubon. These 2 schooners were sailing in a storm on October 19, 1854, when they collided near Thunder Bay Island. The Defiance sank immediately, while the John J. Audubon drifted away and sank later. Both wrecks are amazingly preserved in the depths of Lake Huron, with their masts, rigging, and cargo still intact. New Orleans. This sidewheel steamer was one of the first steamboats on the Great Lakes, built in 1838. It sank on October 13, 1849, after hitting a reef near Middle Island. It's one of the oldest wrecks in the sanctuary and can be seen from a dive boat or a glass-bottom boat. It's a habitat for fish and aquatic plants. L.M. Mason. This schooner was carrying lumber from Alpena to Chicago when it ran aground on the Presque Isle Peninsula on October 8, 1861. It broke apart and sank in shallow water, where it remains today. It's a favorite shipwreck to visit among snorkelers and kayakers, as it's easily accessible and visible from the surface. Nordmeer. This German freighter was carrying steel and machinery from Antwerp to Milwaukee when it ran aground on Thunder Bay Reef on November 19, 1966. It was stuck for 6 months before it broke up and sank in a storm. It's one of the most recent and largest wrecks in the sanctuary and attracts a variety of fish and wildlife. These are just some of the shipwrecks that make Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary a world-class wreck diving destination. Whether you're a novice or an expert diver, you'll find something to explore and enjoy in this underwater museum. 6. The BOS 400. The BOS 400 is a French crane barge that lies on the rocks near Cape Town, South Africa. It's the largest and most visible shipwreck on the South African coast, and a reminder of a maritime disaster that occurred in 1994. The BOS 400 was built in 1984 and was used for offshore construction projects, such as laying pipelines and installing platforms. It had a massive crane that could lift up to 400 tons. In June 1994, it was being towed from Pointe Noire in the Republic of Congo to Cape Town for repairs by a Russian tugboat named Tigre. However, the Tigre was not powerful enough to handle the barge, and the tow rope snapped during a storm. The BOS 400 drifted towards the shore and ran aground on the rocks off Dwika Point near Sandy Bay. The crew managed to escape by helicopter, but the barge was badly damaged and stuck on the rocks. Several attempts were made to salvage the barge, but they all failed due to bad weather and technical difficulties. In the end, the barge was considered a total loss and left to rot. It's been slowly rusting and disintegrating ever since. The BOS 400 shipwreck is now a popular attraction for hikers, photographers, and divers who want to see its rusty skeleton and crane. However, it's also very dangerous, as the metal's sharp and unstable, and the waves are unpredictable. The National Sea Rescue Institute has warned the public to stay away from the wreck and not to climb on it or jump into the sea from it. Would you risk diving here? Let us know in the comments and hit subscribe while you're at it. 5. The abandoned train graveyard. If you're driving along Interstate 10 near Benson, Arizona, you might notice something strange. There are hundreds of train cars lined up on the tracks, stretching for miles and miles in the desert. These are not ordinary trains, but abandoned locomotives that belong to Union Pacific, one of the largest railroad companies in the US. The reason why these trains are left here is unclear, but some speculate that they're surplus vehicles that are not needed due to a decline in manufacturing and rail transport. Some of the trains date back to the 1970s and 1980s and have been exposed to the harsh elements for years. They're slowly deteriorating and rusting away, creating a contrast between modern technology and the barren landscape. The train graveyard is not open to the public, and Union Pacific warns people to stay away from the tracks as trains are frequently moved in and out of the area. However, some curious explorers and photographers have ventured into the site, capturing stunning images of the decaying machines. The train graveyard has also attracted attention from online viewers who've watched aerial footage of the site on YouTube. The train graveyard is a fascinating but eerie example of how human-made structures can be abandoned and forgotten over time. It's also a testament to the changing trends and demands of transportation and industry in the US. 4. The SS Baychimo. The SS Baychimo was a cargo steamer that sailed the Arctic waters for the Hudson's Bay Company in the early 20th century. It became famous for its remarkable survival after being abandoned by its crew in 1931, and for its numerous sightings as a ghost ship for decades afterwards. The Baychimo was built in 1944 in Sweden as the Anga Manalfen and was used for trade between Hamburg and Sweden until World War I. After the war, it was acquired by the Hudson's Bay Company and renamed Baychimo. It was based in Scotland and made 9 voyages along the Canadian coast, delivering supplies to Inuit settlements and collecting furs. On October 1, 1931, the Baychimo was on its way back from Alaska with a cargo of fur when it encountered a severe storm and became trapped in a pack ice near Wainwright, Alaska. The crew waited for the ice to break, but it only got worse. On October 15th, most of the crew were airlifted to safety by the company, leaving behind 15 men to watch over the ship. The men built a wooden shelter on the ice and hoped for the best. On November 24th, another storm hit, and they lost sight of the ship. They thought it had sunk, but a few days later they learned from an Inuit hunter that the ship had broken free and drifted away. They tracked it down and salvaged some of the furs, but decided the ship was too damaged to sail and left it to its fate. The Baychimo, however, did not sink. It continued to drift in the Arctic waters, sometimes spotted by other ships or by Inuit hunters. Some people tried to board it or salvage it, but none succeeded. The last confirmed sighting of the Baychimo was in 1969 near Point Barrow, Alaska. After that, it disappeared from view. The Baychimo became a legend in the Arctic, a mysterious ship that defied nature and human intervention. Some people believe that it still roams the seas, while others think that it finally sank or was crushed by ice. The fate of the Baychimo remains unknown to this day. 3. The plane that time forgot. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, on a remote atoll in the Marshall Islands, lies a mysterious site, a World War II plane wreckage that's been untouched for decades. The plane, a Curtiss C-46 Commando transport aircraft, crashed near Arno Atoll sometime during or after the war and has remained there ever since. How did it get there, and why was it abandoned? The Marshall Islands were a strategic location for the US military during World War II, as they were close to Japan and other enemy territories. The US built several airfields and bases on the islands and used them to launch bombing raids and transport troops and supplies. One of these airfields was on Roy Namor, part of the Kwajalein Line Atoll, where hundreds of planes were stationed. However, after the war ended, the US had to dispose of its surplus aircraft, as they were too costly to ship back home or maintain. Some of them were sold or donated to other countries, but many were simply dumped into the ocean. This was the fate of most of the planes on Roy Namor, which were pushed off the edge of the runway into the lagoon by bulldozers. Some of these planes are still visible underwater today, forming a unique warbird graveyard that attracts divers and historians. But what about the plane on Arno Atoll? How did it end up there, about 200 miles away from Roy Namor? One possible explanation is that it was en route to another destination when it ran into trouble and had to make an emergency landing. Another possibility is that it was one of the few planes that was not dumped into the lagoon, but instead flown to another island for storage or disposal. Perhaps it was forgotten or abandoned there by mistake. Whatever the reason, the plane has become a local attraction and curiosity for visitors. It can be reached by boat from Majuro, the capital of the Marshall Islands, and then by car from Arno Village to Chapo Village. From there, one can either walk or swim to the rocky point where the plane rests, partially submerged in the water. The plane's remarkably intact despite its age and exposure to the elements. Its propellers, wings, fuselage and tail are still recognizable, though rusted and corroded. The plane's not only a relic of World War II, but also a reminder of the nuclear legacy that haunts the Marshall Islands. The US conducted 67 nuclear tests on the islands between 1946 and 1958, some of which were hundreds of times more powerful than the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The tests contaminated the land and water with radioactive fallout, displaced thousands of people from their homes, and caused health problems and birth defects for generations. The US also built a concrete dome on Eniwetok Atoll to store some of its nuclear waste, which is now leaking and threatened by rising sea levels. The Marshall Islands have sued the US for compensation and justice for its nuclear testing program, but have not received any satisfactory response. The US has also refused to help with the maintenance or removal of the dome, claiming that it's the responsibility of the Marshallese government. The people of the Marshall Islands feel betrayed and abandoned by their former ally, who used their land for its own interests and left them with a toxic legacy. 2. SS Thistlegorm. The SS Thistlegorm was a British cargo ship that sank in the Red Sea in 1941 after being bombed by German planes. It's now one of the most famous diving sites in the world, attracting divers who want to explore its rich and well-preserved cargo and marine life. The ship was built in 1940 in Sunderland, England, and named after the Scottish word for blue thistle. It was part of the Alban Line, a company that operated merchant ships during World War II. The ship carried various supplies for the British 8th Army in Egypt, such as trucks, motorcycles, tanks, rifles, aircraft parts, and even 2 steam locomotives. The ship left Glasgow in June 1941 and sailed around Africa to avoid the Mediterranean, where German forces were active. It reached the Red Sea and anchored near Shab Ali, waiting for clearance to enter the Suez Canal. However, on the night of October 6th, 2 German bombers spotted the ship and dropped bombs on its 4th hold, where most of the ammunition was stored. The explosion was so powerful that it ripped the ship apart and sent it to the bottom of the sea in less than 10 minutes. 9 crew members and 4 naval gunners died in the attack. The wreck was rediscovered by Jacques Cousteau in 1956 and featured in his book and film The Silent World. He also removed some items from the wreck, such as a motorcycle and a safe. The wreck remained largely unknown until the 1990s, when it became popular among divers who visited Sharm el-Sheikh. The wreck is now a protected site and a war grave. Divers can see many of the original cargo items still intact on the wreck, as well as a variety of fish and coral that have colonized it. The wreck lies at a depth of about 98 feet and is about 420 feet long. It's usually divided into 2 parts, the bow and midships, which are upright, and the stern, which is twisted and detached. The wreck offers a unique glimpse into history and a thrilling adventure for divers. 1. Greenland's lost spy plane. The B-29 Superfortress was a 4-engine bomber that played a crucial role in the Pacific theater of World War II. After the war, some of these planes were modified for reconnaissance missions during the Cold War. One of them was the Keybird, which flew over the Arctic to spy on the Soviet Union. On February 21, 1947, the Keybird was returning from a mission when it encountered bad weather and lost its bearings. The crew tried to find a way back to their base in Alaska, but they ended up over Greenland and ran out of fuel. They had no choice but to crash land on a frozen lake in the remote northwestern part of the island. The crew survived the landing and set up camp inside the plane, hoping for rescue. After 3 days, they were spotted by a search plane and airlifted to safety. The Keybird was left behind on the ice, where it remained for almost 50 years. In 1994, a team of adventurers and mechanics decided to try to salvage the plane and fly it back to the US. They spent weeks repairing and restoring the plane, but during a test run, a fire broke out in one of the engines and quickly spread to the rest of the plane. The team had to abandon their project and watch as the Keybird burned and melted into the lake. Today, only a charred skeleton of the plane remains on the lake bed, a testament to its history and fate.
Number 7. The Maunsell Sea Forts. Naval fortifications have been around for centuries in order to block enemy landings and assaults. In England, there are still several that exist dating back to the Napoleonic Wars that took place between 1803 and 1815. But these days, the forts are used for more peaceful purposes. Guy Maunsell, a British engineer, came up with an idea during the Second World War to create a sea fortification that would be able to annihilate incoming enemy aircraft. And so, the Maunsell Sea Forts were born, built to defend the UK's skies from German air raids. Construction began on the forts in 1941, with them mainly being comprised of steel and reinforced concrete. These weren't just ordinary naval fortifications though. They were essentially pontoon barges that were placed underwater with several towers, rising roughly 70 feet above the surface of the Thames estuary. Their installation was completed the following year in 1942, but by the time they were finished, air raids were becoming increasingly rare. This location was chosen for the forts because they stood to guard Liverpool's vital convoy port. During the war, Liverpool received many convoys that would deliver essential goods needed by Britain. But because of the city's location, it became vulnerable to bombers flying over England. The Thames estuary fortifications were also on the Luftwaffe's flight path as they headed to bomb London and other industrial centers like Birmingham. The sea forts are made up of a collection of 7 towers, and there are walkways connecting each of them to the central control tower that's situated in the middle of the grouping. The towers were all fitted with 2 40mm Bofors guns and 2 3.75-inch guns, as it was their job to deter and report air raids carried out by the Germans. In the end, the forts exceeded everyone's expectations, and in total managed to shoot down 30 flying bombs and 22 planes. But in the years following the war, the Maunsell Sea Forts were largely abandoned and were officially decommissioned in the late 1950s. These fortifications are still standing though, just off the coast of Whitstable, near the mouth of the Thames estuary. They look like giant tripods rising out of the water, and they'd certainly be impressive to see in person. So if you ever want to take a trip, boat tours are offered today for locals and tourists alike to get a first-hand look at these bizarre structures, which serve to remind us of a bygone era. Number 6. Winchester Mystery House. An eccentric woman from New Haven, Connecticut named Sarah Winchester moved to San Jose, California in 1886 in order to start a new life. Once she arrived, she purchased an 8-room farmhouse and began a small renovation project on the property that would end up taking a whopping $5.5 million and a full 36 years to complete. But construction only ceased on the home when Sarah passed away in 1922. By the time the woman was done building, the Winchester Mansion, as it's been called, was nothing short of a modern marvel, complete with multiple elevators, indoor plumbing, central heating, and a hot shower. The house even had 2 basements and more than 160 rooms in total, with 40 of them being bedrooms. But that's not all, because this mansion had more to it than meets the eye. Inside there are 2,000 doors, but interestingly, not all of them can be walked through. And if that sounds odd, it's because it is. One door leads to a kitchen sink at the bottom of an 8-foot shaft, while another opens to a 15-foot drop that'll land you right in the bushes in the mansion's garden. The doors to nowhere aren't the only bizarre feature you'll find in this house, though. There are stairs that extend to ceilings, secret passages, and stained glass windows that were installed in specific places so they wouldn't get any light. There's also a particularly unusual cabinet that, when opened, extends throughout 30 rooms of the mansion. Nobody's really sure why Sarah Winchester demanded that constant changes be made to her large estate, but there are, of course, some stories. The most prevalent explanation for Sarah's continuous renovations was that she was being haunted by the ghosts of those killed by the Winchester rifles, which was a firearm that her late husband's company had created. When the woman's husband passed away, Sarah was apparently told by a psychic that the only way to keep the spirits at bay was to build a house like a maze, to confuse and trap them within the intricacies of the building. According to this theory, Sarah would avoid being haunted by sleeping in a different bedroom every night and by taking labyrinth paths to get to various sections of her home. But ultimately, heart failure would claim Sarah's life before any ghost would get the chance, as she died in her sleep on September 5, 1922, at 83 years old. 5 months after her passing, the Winchester mansion was open to the public. Today, there are tours available to explore the vast estate, which sits on 4.5 acres of land. But if you decide to visit this haunted destination, beware of the spirits that are said to exist within its walls. Number 5. Bull Sand Fort. Off of northern England's Lincolnshire coast sits a sea fort that dates back to World War II. It's known as the Bull Sand Fort, and it was built to accommodate an impressive 200 troops. It's surrounded by water, so the only way to access it today is by helicopter or boat. The fort is 82 feet in diameter and has 3 floors, a 2-story lookout tower, and even has a basement. The Bull Sand Fort has been in the works since 1941, along with its sister fortification, the Hale Sand Fort. Construction began in May of 1915, and they were built in order to protect the entrance to the Humber estuary. It took over 4 years to finish them though, and they weren't completed until December of 1919, which just so happened to be 1 year after the First World War had already ended. But World War II gave these fortifications a new purpose, so they were modernized and reactivated. However, both forts were regularly assaulted by enemy aircraft during this time. But it wasn't just threats from the sky that they needed to worry about. Submarines were also becoming a growing issue, so submerged netting was installed to prevent enemy subs from traveling up the estuary to Grimsby or Hull. But in the end, the military decided to abandon the forts, and by 1956 they were completely deserted. Bull Sand Fort is situated just 1.5 miles off the shore of Spurnhead Island. It was put up for auction in July of 2022, and the bidding began at £50,000. However, it ended up selling for a whopping £490,000 following an all-out bidding war. Now the fort has a new owner. It might be rather difficult to get up close and personal with it, but you can still visit the area and view it from a distance, as it's clearly visible from the shore. Number 4. Kuster Ghost Town. There's a ghost town located in Kuster, Idaho, that's littered with clues of its former activity. Rusted iron mining equipment can be seen sitting in the settlement's overgrown grass, and bullet holes are clearly visible in a poker table left behind after a skirmish seemingly got out of hand. The town of Kuster was founded in 1879 by speculators who claimed the land below the General Custer mill site. In the 1880s, it only had a population of 300 people, but by 1890, the town had become the most important town of the Yankee Fort, growing to accommodate around 600 individuals in 1896. Kuster only has one street that runs through the middle of town. It has a schoolhouse, a miners' union hall, a jail, and at one point, it even had its own baseball team. However, by the time 1903 rolled around, the glory days of mining were fading away, and gold was becoming increasingly hard to find. The mining industry eventually dried up, and as a result, the town was completely abandoned by 1910. In 1966, the Chalice National Forest took ownership of the town, and in 1981, Kuster was added to the National Register of Historic Places. Today, the site is open to the public and offers a unique glimpse into what life was like for people living here over 100 years ago. There's a museum in the original schoolhouse, a gift shop in the town saloon, and there are even gold panning demonstrations available for those who want to participate. Have you ever visited a ghost town? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. Number 3. Eastern State Penitentiary. Designed by English-born American architect John Haviland, the Eastern State Penitentiary opened its doors on October 25, 1829. It's situated in Philadelphia's Fairmount section and is considered to be one of the most famous prisons in the entire world. Some of the penitentiary's famous inmates include gangster Al Capone and bank robber Slick Willie Sutton. Setting the standard for penal reform at the time, Eastern State's founders believed that solitary confinement could help to reform dangerous criminals. The penitentiary was known for refining the system of separate incarceration and emphasized the importance of reform instead of punishment. And on 4 different continents, an estimated 300 prisons used Eastern's unique wagon wheel floor plan as their own blueprint. The facility was operational until 1971, when the property was purchased by the city of Philadelphia, which had plans to redevelop it. The site received several proposals, including a luxury apartment complex that would be surrounded by dilapidated prison walls, but in the end, they decided against it. Instead, they left the penitentiary as it was and allowed nature to reclaim the area. By the late 1980s, a forest had grown throughout the cell blocks and a large number of stray cats moved in. In 1994, the prison opened its doors once again to offer history tours to curious individuals. And every year around Halloween, there's even an event hosted within Eastern State called Terror Behind the Walls, which is one of the area's most anticipated haunted houses. So if you dare to be scared, you can visit between September 23rd and November 12th to experience the thrill of a lifetime. Number 2. Abandoned Swedish Folk Park. Throughout the late 1800s in Sweden, recreational areas known as folk parks were common. With concert stages, large grassy areas, and playgrounds, these parks were created so that workers and families alike could have somewhere to go and relax. At the beginning of the 20th century, these folk parks were meeting places for individuals to drink, eat, dance, and socialize. But times quickly changed, and nightclubs, discos, and TV entertainment soon made these parks less popular with the general public. In northern Sweden, just outside the small town of Överkalix, one of these folk parks sit on Branneberget Hill. It was once one of the area's most popular hubs, but today it's completely abandoned and it's currently falling apart. The site is still littered with picnic tables where individuals once gathered to blow off steam after a long week. But many buildings here have broken windows and paint has started to chip on the exterior of several structures. For the time being, the folk park's future is uncertain, but until something is decided, the site serves as a popular location for urban explorers who visit the park just to catch the breathtaking view overlooking the town of Överkalix. And at number 1, Copper Mining Town. Near the Kennecott copper mine is the deserted town of Kennecott, Alaska, one of the state's best hidden gems. It's located in Wrangell St. Elias National Park and Preserve, America's biggest national park, and it was declared in 1986 to be a National Historic Landmark. After prospectors found precious minerals such as malachite and chalcocite in the area during the summer of 1900, Kennecott became a hot site full of investment opportunities. Mining engineer Stephen Birch, backed by an investor named James Ralph and the wealthy Havemeyer family, took notice of the area's money-making potential. The men then established the Alaska Copper and Coal Company between 1901 and 1902 and made plans to create a camp nearby in the Copper River census area in order to accommodate the company's workforce. In total, 5 mines were opened in Kennecott during this time, known as Jumbo, Motherlode, Bonanza, Glacier, and Erie. The peak year for production at the site occurred in 1916, when the mines were reportedly producing copper ore that was valued at an impressive $32.4 million. But just shy of 10 years later in 1925, geologists predicted that the mines in the area were starting to run dry, and by 1938, the mine's resources were almost entirely depleted, leaving the camp devoid of life. Today, the mining town is open to the public, although many of the structures are in shambles and some of them look as though they could blow over if there's a strong enough windstorm. But still, the site offers immaculate views and overlooks the incredible Wrangell mountain range and valley below. Number 8. The Alcatraz Escapees. The Alcatraz Escapees were 3 inmates of the notorious Alcatraz prison who managed to break out of their cells and flee the island on June 11, 1962. Their escape is considered one of the most ingenious and daring prison breaks in history. Frank Lee Morris, John Anglin, and his brother Clarence were all serving long sentences for bank robbery and other crimes. They'd been transferred to Alcatraz because of their previous escape attempts from other prisons. The maximum security prison was known for being extremely difficult to break out of, and until the facility's closure in 1963, Morris and the Anglin brothers were the only prisoners to ever escape. The trio spent months planning and preparing for their liberation. They used spoons and other tools to dig holes in the concrete walls of their cells, which led to a utility corridor behind them. They used cardboard and paint to cover up the holes, and they also collected raincoats and contact cement to make a raft and life vests. They made dummy heads out of soap, toilet paper, and hair from the barber shop. which they then placed in their beds to fool the guards. And on the night of June 11th, 1962, they crawled through their holes and climbed to the roof of the prison. Afterward, they slid down a pipe and then made their way to the water's edge. They inflated their raft, paddled away into the darkness, and they were never found missing until the following morning. The FBI launched a massive manhunt for the escapees, but the agency found no conclusive evidence of their fate. They only recovered some personal items and parts of the raft on nearby Angel Island. The FBI concluded that the escapees drowned in the cold and choppy waters of San Francisco Bay and closed the case in 1979. However, some people believe that the escapees survived and made it to the mainland or even another country. There have been various claims and rumors of sightings over the years, but none of them have been verified. These days, the escapees remain on the FBI's wanted list, and as to what really happened to them is a true mystery. Number 7. The Bucky Phillips Manhunt. The Bucky Phillips Manhunt was one of the largest and longest manhunts in New York State history. It lasted for a full 5 months in 2006 and involved the shooting of 3 state troopers, one of whom perished in the crossfire. Bucky Phillips, whose real name is Ralph James Phillips, was a career criminal who spent most of his life in and out of prison. He escaped from the Erie County Jail on April 2, 2006 by cutting through the roof of the kitchen with a can opener. He then went on the run, hiding in the woods and receiving help from some of his supporters. On June 10, 2006, he shot and wounded Trooper Sean Brown during a traffic stop near Elmira. Then, on August 31st of that same year, he ambushed and shot Troopers Joseph Longobardo and Donald Baker Jr. in the town of Pomfret, and sadly, Longobardo succumbed to his injuries on September 3rd. Phillips became a fugitive wanted for murder, and a reward of $450,000 was offered for his capture. He also became a folk hero for some people who admired his ability to evade the authorities and saw him as a rebel. He even left notes and messages taunting the police and expressing his anti-government views. On September 7, 2006, he was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted list, and the next day, he was caught by the Pennsylvania State Police near the New York border. He was hiding in a creek bed and surrendered peacefully when he realized that he was surrounded by officers. He pleaded guilty to shooting all 3 of the troopers and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. And he's currently doing his time at the Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora, New York. Luckily, though, he hasn't made any attempts to escape since his capture. Number 6. John Dillinger. John Dillinger was one of the most notorious and charismatic gangsters of the 1930s, and he became a legend for his daring bank robberies, prison escapes, and clashes with the law. He was also known as Public Enemy Number 1 by the FBI, which pursued him relentlessly up until his death in 1934. Dillinger was born in Indianapolis, Indiana in 1903. He dropped out of school at a young age due to his difficult upbringing. Then, when he was of age, he joined the Navy, although he deserted just after a few months. Afterward, he turned to a life of crime and was arrested for robbery in 1924. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison for the crime, which is where he met other criminals who taught him the tricks of the trade. He was later paroled in 1933, and that's when he decided to form a gang with his prison mates. They began robbing banks across the Midwest using fast cars, machine guns, and explosives. They also broke out of jail several times using fake guns, hostages, and bribes. They became famous for their audacity and charisma and were admired by some people who saw them as rebels against the system. Dillinger also had a reputation as a ladies' man and had several girlfriends, including Evelyn Frechette and Polly Hamilton. He was charming and generous with his money, but also ruthless and violent with his enemies. He even killed several policemen and civilians in cold blood during his crime spree. In 1934, Dillinger became the target of a massive manhunt by the FBI, led by J. Edgar Hoover. He was apprehended twice but managed to escape each time. He even underwent plastic surgery to change his appearance, but it didn't help him evade the law in the end. On July 22, 1934, Dillinger was shot and killed by FBI agents outside of a movie theater in Chicago, and at the time of his death, he was 31 years old. Dillinger's life and death inspired many books, movies, and songs, and he's still remembered today as one of the most infamous and fascinating figures in American history. Number 5. Yoga Master's Incredible Escape. Choi Gap Bok was a 49-year-old career criminal who practiced yoga for 23 years. He was arrested on suspicion of robbery on September 12, 2012, and was put in a detention cell at the police station in Daegu, South Korea. He was held for 5 days before making a daring escape on September 17th by slipping through a food channel at the bottom of the cell. The food slot was only 5.9 inches tall and 17.7 inches wide, but Choi managed to slip through it in 34 seconds by applying skin ointment to his upper body and using his yoga skills. He also used pillows and blankets to make it look like he was still in his bed, fooling the guards who were sleeping at the time. Choi's escape sparked a massive manhunt involving more than 4,000 police officers and helicopters. He was spotted several times in the mountainous area of central South Korea, but he evaded capture by changing his clothes and appearance. He also stole food and money from local residents along the way. After 6 days on the run, Choi was finally caught on September 23rd on the rooftop of a building in Miryang, 19 miles south of Daegu. He tried to resist arrest by throwing tiles at the police, but he was overpowered and taken back into custody. He later said he escaped because he felt humiliated by the police, who treated him like an animal. Choi's escape earned him the nickname Korean Houdini and drew attention to the poor conditions and security of the detention cells in South Korea. Number 4. El Chapo. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman is a Mexican drug lord who leads the Sinaloa cartel, one of the most powerful and violent criminal organizations in the whole world. He escaped from prison twice, in 2001 and 2015, and was recaptured both times, in 2014 and 2016. His first escape took place when he was serving a 20-year sentence for drug trafficking and murder at the Puente Grande prison in Jalisco. He bribed several guards and prison officials and escaped by hiding in a laundry cart that was wheeled out of the facility by a maintenance worker. His second escape was in 2015 when he was held at the Altiplano prison in Mexico State, a maximum security facility. He escaped through a sophisticated tunnel that was dug under his cell's shower. The tunnel was about a mile long and it was well ventilated, well lit, and equipped with a motorcycle on rails that he used to move faster. The tunnel led to a construction site where his accomplices were waiting for him. His escape sparked massive manhunts involving thousands of security forces and international cooperation. He was also one of the most wanted fugitives in the United States, which sought his extradition on drug trafficking and other charges. He was finally recaptured in January of 2016 after a deadly shootout with Mexican Marines in Las Mochis, Sinaloa. He was extradited to the U.S. in January 2017 and is currently serving a life sentence plus an additional 30 years at the ADX Florence prison in Colorado. Number 3. The Libby prison escape. The Libby prison escape was one of the most successful prison breaks of the American Civil War. It took place in February of 1864, when over 100 Union officers escaped from Libby Prison, a Confederate penitentiary in Richmond, Virginia. Libby Prison was a 3-story warehouse that had been converted into a prison for captured Union officers. It was overcrowded, poorly ventilated, and infested with rats. The prisoners who were unfortunate enough to be sent here suffered from hunger, disease, and harsh treatment by the guards. The escape plan was led by Colonel Thomas E. Rose of the 77th Pennsylvania Infantry, who organized a group of prisoners to dig a tunnel from the basement of the penitentiary to a vacant lot nearby. The tunnel was about 50 feet long and 2 feet wide, and it took the men just 17 days to complete. Then, on the night of February 9, 1864, the escape began. The prisoners crawled through the tunnel one by one, emerging in the dark and making their way to the nearby James River. They then tried to reach Union lines by following the river and railroad tracks. The escape wasn't discovered until the next morning when a roll call revealed that 109 prisoners were missing. The Confederates launched a massive manhunt, but only 48 escapees were recaptured. The rest managed to reach safety with the exception of 2 men that drowned in the river during their escape attempt. Number 2. The Texas 7. In December of 2000, the nation was gripped by a captivating manhunt as the notorious Texas 7 orchestrated a daring escape from a maximum security prison, leaving a trail of chaos and tragedy in their wake. What followed was a months-long pursuit that tested the mettle of law enforcement agencies and captivated the public's imagination. The Texas 7 consisted of 7 hardened criminals: George Rivas, Michael Rodriguez, Randy Ethan Halpern, Joseph Garcia, Larry James Harper, Patrick Henry Murphy Jr., and Donald Keith Newberry. Their audacious plan unfolded on December 13th when they overpowered prison workers at the John B. Connolly unit, located near Kennedy, Texas. Armed with stolen firearms, the fugitives embarked on a spree that would forever etch their names into criminal history. Initially, the Texas 7 sought refuge in Colorado, where they unleashed a wave of violent robberies to fund their escape and evade capture. And in a brazen act of defiance, they even staged a high-profile armed robbery at a sporting goods store, leaving an officer dead in their wake. As their notoriety grew, the nation became fixated on the fugitives, and the manhunt intensified. Over the following weeks and months, law enforcement agencies employed extensive resources to track down the Texas Seven. The pursuit spanned multiple states and involved a coordinated effort between local, state, and federal authorities. The media played a significant role in disseminating information and aiding the investigation, generating widespread awareness of the fugitives' identities and the urgency of their capture. Ultimately, the Texas Seven's reign of terror came to an end on January 23, 2001, when one of the fugitives, Larry James Harper, was captured following a routine traffic stop in Colorado Springs. The remaining 6 members were apprehended shortly after, culminating in a dramatic standoff in a Colorado RV park. The Texas Seven case brought to light glaring security lapses within the prison system and triggered a re-evaluation of protocols for handling dangerous inmates. And at number 1, Richard McNair, Master of Deception. Richard Lee McNair was born in 1958 on December 19th. He's a convicted murderer and escape artist who has broken out of prison 3 times using various ingenious methods. In 1987, McNair was a sergeant in the Air Force stationed in Minot, North Dakota, and that's where he shot 2 men who surprised him during a burglary. They both survived initially, but one of them eventually succumbed to his injuries, and as a result, McNair was apprehended and given 2 life sentences for murder and attempted murder, along with a 30-year sentence for burglary. McNair's first escape attempt took place in 1988 when he used lip balm to slip out of handcuffs at the police station. Luckily, though, he was recaptured just after a few hours. His second escape was in 1992, when he crawled through a ventilation duct at the state penitentiary. He was on the run for 10 months before being caught in Nebraska, which is when he was transferred to the federal prison system. McNair's most daring escape, however, occurred in 2006, when he hid in a crate of mail bags and mailed himself out of the federal prison in Louisiana. And once he was out, he cut himself free and walked away. He even fooled a police officer who stopped him by pretending to be a jogger. He became one of the most wanted fugitives by the U.S. Marshals and was even featured on America's Most Wanted. McNair traveled to Canada twice to evade capture and stayed in various provinces where he used fake identities. He was finally arrested in 2007 after a random police check in New Brunswick. He's currently serving his sentence at a high-security prison in Colorado. And from behind bars, he's corresponded with Canadian journalists who's written a book about his life and escapes. If you were trying to escape prison, which method do you think would be more effective? Tunneling a way out through the wall or bribing prison guards? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.